Ba? Wala ko nalimutan.
Pare, mga saksaka mo.
Kakain ba tayo sa ano? Sa...
Oh, yeah.
Ano ba?
Ate pagkala.
No matches. Baka yun ba? May in-add sa road, pero hindi ko alam kung may dalawa. O, parang may Dan Murphy's isa, tapos babalik na tayo.
Oh, nga mo.
Ano ba?
Naka-reverse ka eh.
Ano ka lang?
Kumala ka.
Kaya na. Pero umakit ba? Ayan na lang. Kumain daw sa iyo.
Gilid. Hindi ko makita. Three more lights. The third light is ready. Gear left.
Dami scooter dito, no?
James, go. Wala na kayo ng cafe near Pontville Distillery.
May kape dyan, may kape dyan.
Proper cafe. Ay, search ba kayo ng cafe, Patrick? We're on our way to LARK Distillery. We're catching up our first cafe at Moe's. Is it Moe's Cafe?
Moe's Cafe.
We gotta find some breakfast and see if it's good.
Rodrigo was the one that searched for this.
Yeah.
So if it's no good, it's on him.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You can't tell this guy to drive safely.
Save naman eh. No swerving, please.
Swerving.
Thank you, Edwin.
Thank you, Ed.
Thank you, Edwin.
Parang nagluto ako kagabi, di pa thank you.
Thank you, Ed.
Eh, nag-edit ako ng video. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sarap ah.
Worth it naman pala yung pag-intay.
Balikan na namin mamaya kasi.
How is it?
The wait is all worth it.
Best in Tasmania?
Actually, pare, it's a pretty good croissant. Bacon tsaka. Never thought of this. Now, this is Ryan from the R.E.R. Whiskey March, right? We're on our way to LARK Distillery. We actually went to this cafe. It's called Moe's Cafe and Restaurant. For some reason, it's got a best of the best winner, but it is actually good. So if you guys are ever in Tasmania, make sure you guys check out Moe's Cafe and Restaurant. May iwasan. Mapapit pa rin yun dyan. Dire-diretso. Mas delikado pag next word. Alright.
Tayo lang. Ayos.
Ayun o. Lapan sa Pukochi.
Employees yan, tol.
90 RK.
Pero saan ka tapasok?
Ito lang.
Cellar door. Right now we're at the LARK Distillery, so we're about to begin the tour. So I think his name's Thomas, our tour guide. So hopefully it becomes a very exciting experience, man. But so far so good.
So, we're going to kick things off with a bit of a guided tasting, just to give you a bit of an idea of the finished product. Starting off with our classic cask. Then we'll have a little wander into the distillery and kind of go through the whole process from the start to see how you get some of our beautiful barley here in Tassie to turn into this lovely whiskey that we have. I'll point out some of the key differences because I assume you guys have been on a distillery tour before.
It's actually
This is the first time, bro.
Even better. Well, yeah, I'm going to go through absolutely everything with you.
Beautiful.
And then we'll go for a wander over to our on-site cooperage and have a bit of a play around in there. I'll pull out some staves and you get to see the inside of a cask and stick your head in some as well.
Ooh.
So see how that goes.
How long have you been working with Lark?
Almost a year and a half.
Year and a half, that's good.
Yeah. Didn't know anything about whiskey before. Now I know more than your average Joe.
Have you tried most of it?
I've tried all of them.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you can tell us good like which to pick if we're deciding to buy.
Well, it depends on what style of whiskey you enjoy, because you're going to get a lot of different textures and flavors. So if you prefer something sweeter, something a bit more peaty.
He likes the peat,
rich,
like
viscous,
us three. We
free.
like not too much peat. Like I don't really like enjoy peat taste.
Well, most of our stuff is lightly peated. We don't really do the heavily peated style, but we do peat smoke all the barley ourselves in-house at our Cambridge distillery. So most of these will have like a little touch of peat to them.
Yep.
The one that's prominent is the Tasmanian peated, but even that's not a heavily peated whiskey. I get more like spice on the palate.
Have you tried Lafroig before?
I have. It was the worst, first whiskey I ever tried.
Yes. Is that anywhere close to Lafroig?
No. So Lafroig sits at around a 90 on the peat scale.
Yep.
We're at a 15. So like
15.
a sixth of the amount
Oh,
of
that's
peat
all right.
Lafroig
That's all
has.
right.
But I noticed that there's no age.
Yeah, correct. So the main reason for that being is that we don't do it by age. We do it entirely by taste. So we will check every cask every year and taste all of our spirits, see how they're coming along. If they need more time, they need more time.
So you do it by test. Is that what you said? By testing it and see how it tastes.
As it's getting closer to being matured, then we'll taste it more frequently, but at least once a year.
Wow.
We'll try every single cask we have. So that's the fun job of Chris Thompson, our head blender.
Okay.
And he's the guy that does all the marriages and makes these beautiful bottles of whiskey for you guys.
I'm not gonna.
Yeah, so he's just made a good point. There's one set of whiskies that we have an age statement on. Some of the oldest whiskey in Tassie, you've got our Legacy series up the top. So some of the last whiskey that was ever distilled by Bill himself before he handed the reins over to his daughter. 15 years in French oak ex-tawny casks. And if you've ever had an Australian whiskey, you know that's a long time for an Aussie whiskey.
Yes.
So it was quite intense when we got around to it and tasted it. And we decided that it would be better fit with a bourbon and sherry kind of mixed.
When you say
finishing.
tawny cask, right? What does that? Because like last night that was the first time we've ever tried a whiskey that's from tawny cask.
Yeah, so tawny is port.
Port.
Port can only be called port if it's from Portugal.
Yep.
But so tawny is port from everywhere but Portugal.
Okay.
So it's like Australia's version of
Okay. All
of
right.
port.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So our cask strength stuff is sitting at 58% for
Yeah.
that one. It's not going to come out of the cask at 58. It'll come out the cask at like, for us, about 64%.
Oh yeah.
So you'll always add a little bit.
But how much? Little bit, like, because we've seen some whiskeys that they actually put a fair bit of water.
Yeah, so you actually have a machine called an Anton Par, where you stick the tube in, press the button a couple of times, it'll suck up some of the whiskey and it'll tell you exactly what percentage of alcohol is it. Whiskey out here, we're the oldest still practicing distillery in Australia. It's only 32 years. It's pretty fresh because you weren't actually allowed to make spirits since 1839. Oh, sorry, whiskey, gin, and moonshine are the three that you couldn't make for that long. Until Bill helped get the laws changed, and now we've got 400 distilleries in Australia and a lot of them right here in Tassie, which is pretty fun. Part of the reason for that, we've got beautiful barley, awesome water, as everyone knows, and a really cool climate that does fluctuate in temperature, which means our whiskey matures a bit quicker as well than, say, Scotland. Grab yourself a glass. I've got one for myself as well, just to kind of guide you through it. Try not to smell it or taste it just yet, because we're going to go through this and just kind of get a bit of an understanding of our whiskey. If you give it a roll around the glass, or like this, or just a bit of a swirl, you'll see that it starts to form a little bit of a film around the top. And so the thicker that is, it's going to tell you a bit about the whiskey itself. The thicker, generally it's going to have higher water content, so it'll be lower in alcohol, and it'll be slowly dripping down the side of the glass. And the more that, slowly that runs down, the more viscous it's going to be. So there might be a bit about the ABV, but it also might tell you a bit about the cask it's been in. The cask, if it's had something viscous like a fortified wine, it's also going to take some of that viscosity into itself. So also, you have the colour. What kind of colour are we looking at here? It can go anywhere from, say, a pale straw all the way to like red or brown, depending on a few different factors. But what's this one look at?
It's bronze.
Bronze, honey.
Does Lark actually, I mean,
No.
yeah, color? No, it's not part of it.
No, it's the spirit itself is clear, as we'll see a bit later on. All of the colour comes from the tannins in the wood. So it's one of those things that you just got to give it time. The colour will develop on its own. Yeah, so I heard bronze, I heard honey, amber, you know, golden, all of those things, pretty accurate. So this sits kind of pretty squarely in the middle of that range that I was mentioning. And if you hold it up to the light, you'll see there's like a little reddish hue to it as well. That's going to be from the maturation cask as well. So the thing that was in it beforehand. So this already tells me it's a little bit more fortified. So I might get some fruity notes from it as well. It's pretty low in ABV because it's got quite thick legs on it as well. Yeah.
So high the ABV, is it like the thicker it is, what you're saying?
The
like,
thinner.
The thinner it is.
So more alcohol is going to be thinner because alcohol evaporates at a lower temperature than water, and water is going to make it thicker because of the fact that it's going to remain a liquid rather than evaporating. Everything evaporates at any temperature. I won't go too sciencey for you, but obviously the higher temperature, more easily it's going to evaporate. Then you get onto the smell. So there's a little thing with whiskey, which is that the esters in it are constantly evaporating. So even while we're just standing here, there's going to be esters spewing out of that glass constantly. So that's the reason why when I walk up with a tray of whiskey, you can smell it coming. You don't have to have the glass right up to your nose. So those particles that are lighter than air are going to be coming out of the glass. So if you smell above it, you can get those more delicate kind of aromas, your floral characteristics, maybe like sweet notes, that sort of thing. So that one you can just have a good old sniff. And then as you go down into the glass, you're going to have the esters that are evaporating and like your heavier phenols. So maybe your peat, your earthiness, those kind of darker, rich, fruity notes might sit a bit lower. So if you have a smell, the most important part with this is this whiskey, it's not going to matter too much, but as you work your way up to the higher ABV ones, or the less diluted whiskies, if you breathe with both your mouth and your nose at the same time, you're not going to force those esters through your nose, so you're not going to lose your sense of smell as quickly. So it's going to feel weird the first time you do it, but just let it kind of gently waft in and you'll get more of those subtle notes coming through. You still breathe through your nose, but just instead of forcing it through your nose, you just like you would normally breathe. And then, most people's favourite, the taste. As you sit it on your tongue, because it is quite cool in here, it's going to be a little bit harsh on the very start, but then as it warms up, you'll find the flavours will start to evolve and develop. You'll get your fruity notes starting to kind of characterise themselves, and you can get some of that on the tongue. Then after you swallow, it'll also be a little bit more diluted, so it's not going to be as hot, is a good way to describe it, I guess. But give it a crack.
What are we tasting right now? Which part of what kind of, is it that bottle or not?
I was going to tell you at the end, but
Okay.
yeah. So this is our classic cask.
Oh.
So this is flagship whiskey for us. It's port and sherry matured, which is where you get that reddish hue in the whiskey. It's where you get those beautiful fruity aromas from. What kind of flavors are we getting in that one? Whiskey, accurate.
That's really
Yeah.
good whiskey, yeah.
Yeah, so like maybe a bit of grain, a bit of oak. It's pretty classic sort of styles. Any textural elements to it? It's a little bit, say, oily. Yeah. It's got a nice mouthfeel to it. Just sits pretty nicely on the palate. Subtle fruity notes maybe coming through, like a bit of fruit cake or some spice, that sort of thing. And yeah, and then
There's a hint of peat, right?
yeah, the best part, if you haven't had a sip in the last like 10 seconds, you can still taste it. That peat just gives you the length. That's called the length of the whiskey. So some whiskies will be quite short it'll just have the flavor while it's in your mouth and then kind of disappears pretty immediately afterwards. Others will linger for a while, and that's just adds length and complexity to it.
Is it important to let the whiskey breathe when you open it, when you pour it, or?
Yeah, I wouldn't drink it straight away. The most important thing is that you don't shake your bottle of whiskey.
Okay, yeah.
Because that's going to break parts of the layers in it, and it's going to oxidize
Yep.
a bit more. If you just pour it nice gently into the glass, it shouldn't matter too much. But if you're aggressively pouring it, yeah, just let it sit for a little bit before you have a go. Because it is a solution at the end of the day. It's water and alcohol and all of the bits of wood and fortified wine that's in there. So if you leave it too long, it's going to actually separate out into those separate layers as well. Whiskey does not ever technically go bad. It can never be, that's a really weird thing to say. It can never really be bad for you because it is alcohol, so it kills bacteria.
Yeah. That can change over time.
Yeah, so the things that will make it lose flavour is sunlight, so you want to keep it out of direct sunlight, and oxidation. So if you've opened the bottle, then yeah, you should drink it, but it depends on how much you drank. So if I've had this many whiskies out of it and it's sitting it like there, it should be fine for the next 20 years, honestly. But if you've drank half of it, you want to be a bit quicker with it. Yeah, exactly.
If you've transferred to a decanter, right, how long would that actually last? Like,
It's going to start tasting different.
it's always
pretty
better
quickly.
to leave it on the original bottle, right?
Yeah. There was someone that told me that because they liked to drink half of the bottle and then move on to the next one, they actually used a type of gas that is denser than air to settle on top of the whiskey so that it kept the oxygen out of it. And then you just pour your whiskey and it flows right out. You just put some more gas in. Keeps it pretty cool. But I guess that's more for your very intense whiskey people. Yeah, that's it. But yeah, this is super typical of Australian whiskey. We love our fortified wines, our ports, our sherries, our muskets, all of that sort of stuff. Seppeltsfield in South Australia, big on their Para, which is their style of tawny, and we use quite a lot of their barrels. Obviously, you will get your bourbons as well, very, very common cask type. But yeah, we use all first fill ports and sherries for this. It's a marriage of those ones. But yeah, you didn't have to finish your whiskey. You can take them with you.
Thomas, we came here for this.
That's fair.
We're going
Come
to
for a wander with me, guys. We'll go out to the distillery.
Represent women.
Beautiful buildings from the 1800s. This one was finished in 1846, the stable in 1852, and the homestead out the back, you would have seen with the lovely garden, was completed in 1826. So one of the oldest farmsteads in Australia. In the early 2000s, a couple called the Kernkeys took over the venue and wanted to restore it to its beautiful heritage. So up the top, you notice the archways look much newer. They actually reopened the original sandstone quarry and mined it all the way to completion to be able to fix the site. So the most of the repairs happened on the homestead, but you will see some other parts. Damien Mackey's a very well-known Tasmanian distiller, started making some triple distilled Irish whiskies. That's when you get these guys popping up all behind us. Obviously not the same heritage as them. So they would have popped up in the early 2010s, and they started distilling in, I believe it was 2016. So you've got our distillery right here, which we're gonna go for a wander into. We'll run over how we make our spirit. We've got our bottling shed up the back where if you were here on a weekday, you'd see 20 cars out here because we bottle everything by hand.
Oh.
We do all the labeling and everything on site as well. Yeah, keep it in-house. And then we've got a cooperage over there as well. One of the very few distilleries to have an on-site cooperage. A cooperage is where you can maintain, repair your casks, your barrels.
Okay.
Yeah. So usually you'd have to send your casks away if they got damaged or broken to get them fixed by someone that's trained to do so. But we get to do it here ourselves, which is pretty cool. Very helpful when you get a leaky cask, because if you imagine that a cask's leaking at a drip every 5 seconds, just say 2 days later, you're probably not going to have any whiskey left. So you got to get it fixed pretty quick. But welcome. This is our Pontville Distillery. It's obviously not running right now. They only work Monday, Fridays, the guys out here. But it's home to our largest copper pot still, that wash still at the back with the steel bottom. First things first. Does anyone know? Can anyone tell me what whiskey is made from?
Barley.
Barley is a good answer. It's just grain in general.
Grain.
Any grain that you can ferment, you can make whiskey from. So your big three are barley, rye, and corn. Corn being bourbon. But you can make it from anything. So there's some Japanese distillery that make it from rice, although most of them use barley as well. The difference is going to be the amount of alcohol that it produces and the flavor of the spirit as well. So you'll get less alcohol from some other grains, and you'll get a slightly different flavor profile. Maybe it doesn't have as high of an oil content, maybe it's not as floral or fragrant. So typically you'll stick to those big three. We use barley, all Tasmanian malted barley, and the biggest distinction for the start of the process for us, I think I already mentioned to you guys, is that we use brewing barley. There's a million different species of barley, and I don't know specifically what each one is, but brewing barley is lower yield of alcohol, higher oil content, and a little bit more floral in character. Okay. So we go for a more flavorful spirit, but we get a little bit less spirit out of it. So that's kind of why we go for that. Distilling barley, higher yield, more of a kind of base spirit sort of style. Does anyone know what the malting process is? That's all right, I'll go through it. So you take your green barley, just say you've just cleared it off the field, it's still fresh and green and fragrant, and you want to convert the starches that are inside that little grain into a specific carbohydrate that you're going to use as sugar to fuel the yeast for fermentation. So the way you do that is you kind of just get the barley to start germinating, and so it'll start that conversion process inside itself, and then right before it sprouts, it's going to have the highest amount of it, and you hit it with a bunch of heat and kill it. So you trap those beautiful nutrients inside the barley, and you're going to use that to then make some spirit. So this is malted barley. You can kind of smell a little bit of the flavors that you get in whiskey kind of coming through even just in the barley itself, because while you're distilling it, you're going to be taking out a bunch of those aromas and flavors, but you're also going to be keeping quite a few of them as well. It's not just alcohol that you're producing, you're also taking some of those aromas and that oil content. Yeah, go for it, man. Typically, in your Scottish distilling method, you would peat your barley while you're malting it. So use the peat as a sort of fuel source in that malting process, and the smoke that gives off is going to kind of cling to the moist barley and linger through the entire process of making whiskey and give you that smoky flavour. The more peat, the more smoke, the more peaty it's going to be. We do a very lightly peated style, and we don't do it in the malting process. We actually do it afterwards. So we buy in our barley malted, and we do the peat smoking after the fact. Which is a much more efficient method peat-wise, because we have this little furnace where we pop our dry peat in, we set it on fire, and it goes into this giant tumbler of grain, which will tilt on its side and start slowly spinning and dampening the grain so that the smoke can bind to it. So at the end of the day, we use about 100 kilos of peat per 2 ton of grain. So it's a 20-to-1 sort of ratio. Whereas in your traditional method, it's going to be a lot closer to your 2-to-1.
Where do you get your peat from?
Yeah. First things first. Does anyone know what peat is?
It's Scotch peat.
It's like one of those germinated some freaking moss or something, right?
Moss, great answer. So peat is a bog. So you have a bog with a bunch of decomposing plants in it. It'll compress and decompose over time. It takes about 20,000 years for peat to form under specific conditions. So it's a fairly rare thing. It wants generally pretty cold temperatures. Hotter is going to kind of dry it out too fast, and it's not going to decompose properly. Then you've got a layer of moss growing on it, decomposing it and compacting it down over time. If you give it, say, another 100,000 years, it'll turn into coal, just under pressure and more time as well. So you dig it up, and back in traditional, old school Scotland, they'd use it to fuel their homes, their fires, keep them warm, all that sort of stuff. And that's why around your coastlines in Scotland, so Islay and that sort of thing, you're going to get your more peaty whiskies, and down the centre of Scotland, less peaty, because they had a train line, so they had access to coal, so they didn't need to use peat anymore. but it's a very traditional sort of flavour profile for whiskey. So even though it doesn't necessarily serve the malting purpose, we still want to include it because it's got a beautiful complex flavour to it. So we dig it up from the Central Highlands of Tassie. We've got our own peat bog and our own mining licence. So technically speaking, we're the smallest commercial mining company in Australia. Because the whole operation is 2 guys with a shovel each and
Just for the peat.
and a ute and a trailer. They dig it up, stick it in the back and cart it back down here.
Do you get to smell that?
Oh yeah, sure. So you're going to mill it, much like you would just classic flour. So you're going to get those husks, that grist, as in there, but you're also going to get that beautiful white flour. That's the most important part. That's what's going to infuse into the water and become your alcohol. The husks, the way I think of it is it's like bones in a broth. It's going to add flavour and texture to the liquid, but you're not going to eat it afterwards. So you're going to take that out later. Come down here. In the back far corner, that's our mash tun. So this is where you will put your flour and your grist and add a bunch of water to it. It's going to slowly kind of incorporate the flour into a liquid. So you're going to have all your grist and husks floating to the top, and eventually you'll take them off. But you need to make sure that all that flour is incorporated into the water. So you'll end up with like a opaque barley soup kind of looking thing, or like what's the word I'm looking for? Porridge. Kind of looks like a bit like porridge, but more watery. Notice it's clear. This is whiskey, but it's not allowed to be called whiskey yet. So this gets stuck in a cask for a minimum 2 years before it's allowed to be called whiskey in Australia. In Scotland, it's 3 years. Has anyone ever had mezcal? I think there is a lot of similarities between this and mezcal. So this is peated New Mexico spirit as well. So remember my little tricks that I mentioned? Breathe through your mouth and your nose at the same time, because you're going to get a lot of intense flavors here.
You can disinfect yourself.
So you can smell that earthy, oily peat. You can get that aroma. You can smell some of the sweetness from the grain as well.
It actually does smell a lot like tequila.
Yes, I was about to say that.
Yeah,
I was about to say
it's got that earthiness behind it. It's a little sweet. Especially on the palate. Give it a sip. You can drink this. It's just very high in alcohol content. It's a little grassy, which I get a lot in mezcal. There's a little bit of turpentine in the background as well. That stringent character I was talking about. That's obviously going to be taken out in the
You shouldn't
barrel
do this.
process.
You're driving.
Yeah, it's funky, isn't it?
Oh my god, that's good.
That's why they don't sell it like this, I reckon.
And remember what I said about it being really thin if it's higher in ABV? When you swirl it around the glass, you can see it becomes this like super thin, almost dotted line because of how thin the spirit is.
You make.
But yeah, it's all it needs is to be chucked in a bourbon cask for like 60 days, and then it's mezcal, basically. The spirit after the maturation. Whereas if it's really high, you're probably going to get a very light spirit at the end, because you have to add a lot more water to get it down to the kind of ABV that you want to sit it at. And so where you open the valves at each porthole will pick exactly what ABV your spirit's going to come out at. You can't actually distill 100% alcohol just because of the way that science works. And your solution, eventually you're going to get to about, I think it's like 95% is where it gets almost impossible to get it higher, because as I mentioned, your alcohol is going to be taking particles with it. It becomes one constant solution at about 95% alcohol, where the alcohol and the things that are with it have the exact same boiling point. So they'll both boil and evaporate at the same time. Yeah.
How many distilleries does Lark have? Two. So one in Pontville and one in...
Here and Cambridge.
Okay.
But come for a wonder, we're going to go over to the cooperage, the other one.
Cooperage.
Yeah, so a cooper is the person that will make the cask itself. It's a very, very true old school profession, and there's not a lot of them around these days. So we're pretty lucky to be able to have this place. But it's a very specific art form, because you're turning individual planks of wood into a perfectly sealed cask with nothing but the bits of wood and a couple of steel rings just to keep it all together. So you have to be absolutely perfect. Otherwise, you're not going to have any whiskey left in it after 5 years. Or maybe even a couple of days if you're really bad at it. So this is our cooperage. Obviously they're not working today, so we get the place to ourselves, which is pretty cool. But this here is a little thing showing you the sizes of casks. Anyone want to hazard a guess what, say, we're going to go with this one. What size barrel that is? At a guess?
120.
120 is pretty close. This is an American standard size barrel. So this is this side? Bourbon, 2 litre, 200 litre. So that's American oak barrel, typically used for bourbons, but you might find something else popped in there. Need them. But yeah, each one is made from an individual little stave, like this bad boy. But I'm gonna give you guys some whiskey first so that you can not just listen to me talk the whole time.
Straight from the barrel.
So this one's a lot higher in ABV. This is a cask strength sitting up around, yeah, a little bit under 60% ABV. It does vary. The barrel is kind of cheating because we obviously don't want it to continue to age as it's being used. So it does have a little metal bladder in it, hence the tap. So this one here, you can kind of guess what this cask was by the color on it and the beautiful shiny sugary crystals that are on it. It's either a sherry or a port cask. I reckon this was probably a tawny. Give it a little sniff. Yeah, so you'll get a little bit of richness. Obviously, it's not going to smell that intensely while it's dry. Also, be careful of splinters. Try not to slide your hand along it too much. It is a piece of wood. But yeah, you'll get a little bit of that sweet, fruity kind of notes coming through. But I love showing off this because you can see on the side how much it kind of penetrates the wood. So you can see that shade of kind of purpley, pinkish, or reddish parts, and so it goes, pretty far into the wood, but it also means that it hasn't gone all the way through. So if you start with your base spirit, obviously it changing color and flavor means that you're taking something out of the cask, so eventually you're going to run out of wood flavor in your wood. So what you'd have to do then, unless it's something like this where it's beautiful and crystally and sugary, you might just use that as a finishing cask to quickly add a lot of flavor to your whiskey. So you can just pop some whiskey in one of these casks, let that incorporate into it, and then pop it in a bottle. But just say this didn't have any sugar on it and it had already been used to finish some whiskey, you're going to not have any of that beautiful tawny on the outside, and you're going to not have a lot of oak. You don't have to be able to make the casks, you can just repair them, which is super helpful and very important. But to actually make the casks, you need to be able to have the wood at the right temperature and the right level of humidity and water content in it so that it can actually bend. Much like a compound bow and things like that, you have to have exactly the right wood, otherwise you're just going to snap it and it's never.
Is it only oak that you use for your barrels, or is there any other kind of wood that you can use to?
Typically just oak, yeah. So American oak and European oaks are your most common. If anyone uses any other type of wood, you'll probably see it on the release, like it'll be a special thing, like Mizunara. We've done a Mizunara release before, which was I think a virgin cask.
What we're having is a cask strength whiskey, right?
Yeah, that's sitting just under 60%, and it's a tawny cask, so it'll have a bit more richness, a bit more fruity notes, and the peat that comes through will be a little bit more prominent as well. Yeah. I got a fun thing for you. Try this cask.
Yeah.
So it's like
Smells like sultana.
raisins, sultanas, like burnt kind of jam. It's a bit sticky.
I just want to see the
That's
inside.
good. No, I smell it.
Yeah,
That's nice.
What?
yeah. So you'll notice that the bunghole, which is a great name by the way, the bunghole's on this side. So it would have been sitting lying down this way, with that being the base, so that's where all of it's settled, and the top is actually pretty clean if you look on that side. But the best part, you can just do this, get a little bit of musket.
Hey,
Do it. Grab
Can
some.
we do it?
Here you go. Taste it.
It's like sugary and sweet,
I'm gonna
and you
try
get
it.
that really like jammy musket. Try and get the slightly damp bit, not the white bit. That's paint. Black is good. Black is a little bit of that musket and kind of toasty cask. Yeah. So this would, if it didn't have a broken lid,
Yeah, let me try.
which
tried it?
yeah, it's quite go for it. Quite severely broken. Yeah, between 5 and 12 years for us, minimum of 2 years. Yeah, so 2 years is just for it to be allowed to be called whiskey. But yeah, typically it's not going to have enough flavour by that point. Specifically that beautiful oak in the background and that sort of thing. And it also needs to, as I mentioned in the distillery, take out some of the more stringent flavours. So your maturation is going to be around 5 to 12 years, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter, depends, especially in Australia. You could have 2 of the exact same spirit, 2 of the exact same barrel, made at the same time, had the same thing in them, put whiskey in it, sit it out in the bond store in the exact same place, like right next to each other. They will be wildly different. And so, yeah, with this one, your finishing cask is really going to be just to give a layer of flavour and texture over the top. Super fast process, doesn't take long at all. We can shave back a little bit of the cask, but one very important thing is going to be a bit of heat. So what we'll do is we'll build a little fire. You can toast it in any way. Like some places have like very fancy versions where you tip it upside down and put fire shooting up into it. We just have a little metal container. We do all of our coopering by hand, so we're keeping with the theme. You'll build a fire in it, fill the bottom of it with water, and then pop it inside, and you can use a temperature radar to check the outside of the cask, because you don't care how hot it is in there, you want to know exactly how warm the wood itself is. So you want it to sit at a specific temperature for a toast, only for like 45 minutes, something along that lines. And so I equate it to like when you're having a shower, and if you have a hot shower, it opens your pores and stuff like that. It opens the pores in the wood, and you get a much better whiskey interaction so that it can actually absorb some whiskey and put flavour into the whiskey as well. Oh yeah, there you go. So that's what they did with this one. And you can see that they've done a pretty bloody bang up job. And actually that's super helpful. I was going to talk about that. You can see where they put some flagging in as well. So that is basically just a big old leaf, and I'll show you what it looks like on the inside and why you use specifically that one. Aha, because it's kind of spongy.
Yeah, right.
So you dry it out and you'll put it in the cask itself. Give it a squeeze. It's actually, it bounces back. So when you use it to fill gaps, it's going to squish together, and then as the whiskey gets to it, it'll give it some. It'll expand. Yeah, that's the word. Sorry, my brain's not working today. And so that'll help seal the gaps. In distilling, we've had a distilling license since 1992. Yeah, which is very short, which is why the biggest still we have is pretty small. If you go to any Scottish distillery, some of them have pot stills the sizes of 2-story houses. Like they're gigantic. And so they could fit, hundreds of thousands of litres in there. The 2 largest producers of Scotch make 21 million litres a year annually. Wait, I said a year annually. Anyway, and we currently have less than 3 million litres total under maturation. Just say 60% of it isn't usable yet, 40% of it is, and so we don't even have 1 million litres of whiskey to sell right now. So if 2 million people want to buy a bottle of Lark, we're stuffed. The plan is, this is going to be our new home, so we're going to consolidate under one distillery. We're going to have the wooden building distillery knocked down, and we're going to hopefully dig a few stories down, make our brand new distillery that'll make about 1 million litres a year. Kind of covered most of it. Yeah. Sick. That's it, guys. We're going to wander back to the cellar door. I've got one more whiskey to share with you guys.
Hey Thomas, how come the bottles of Lark mostly comes with 500 ml? 500 ml, yeah.
Is this the question that you were...
No, because the thing is, you know the price point of Australian whiskey compared to the 18 and 21 year olds of Scotch whiskies, right?
Yeah.
It's almost similar. So that's, I think, for us anyway, right? That's the reason why we lean towards the Scotch 18, 21 year old, because of the price point.
Yeah.
And to actually try the Australian whiskey for 500 ml, even with the price point of it.
Yeah, so the main reason is just that we don't make anywhere near as much whiskey. Yeah.
Oh.
So, like, if we were able to make 20 million litres, it'd probably be a little bit cheaper. But also the taxation laws in Australia is very high on spirits. So even just to make it break even, you still have to be a little bit more expensive than Scotch
Because
does.
honestly, right? Because like I said, this is our first time to actually taste Australian whiskey. It could be very competitive because it could go against all those 18, 21 year old whiskeys,
Yeah.
man, if the price point was...
Because it doesn't take us anywhere near as long to build up
Yeah.
that beautiful, rich intensity of flavour.
Yeah.
So, like, just say if you were to compare a 6-year-old, obviously it does vary quite a bit, but you'd probably be looking at, say, a 12-year-old Scotch.
Because I think the whiskey is as good as the Japanese whiskey as well, eh?
Yeah, different
Yeah.
styles. It depends on the Japanese distillery, but I tend to get more light,
Suntory.
delicate fruit notes, maybe some floral characteristics from them. A lot less oily by nature, whereas we go down that oily kind of side where you get, in my humble opinion, a bit more textural kind of mouth consistency, so a nicer sitting on the palate, and a bit more intensity and darkness and flavour.
Yeah.
Like your dark fruit notes will come through a lot more, whereas they're like the light,
They're more light.
pear,
Yeah,
peaches, that sort of
yeah. It's freaking good. Welcome back to the R.E.R. Whiskey Match. Bernie boy, we just finished our LARK Distillery tour. What can you say, man?
It's a really good experience. A lot of flavors and the history of Australian whiskey. Just 30 years, very young.
Very young. Is it a must try if you come to Tasmania? One of the tourist things that you should be doing.
Yeah, I think it's the highlight.
Yes, particularly if you enjoy whiskey, right?
Yeah.
Interview ko naman si paring Edwin. No? Edwin, what do you reckon of your LARK Distillery tour, man? Pag gumaganon ka, bakit shit? Kami lahat nag-enjoy. Ikaw shit.
Nainis ako pare.
Bakit ka nainis?
Kasi nakaisa lang ako, sila nakalimang whiskey.
Bakit nakaisa ka lang?
Kasi ako magdadrive eh. Mag-ano kayo, huwag kayong mag-drive.
Make
Kung
sure
whiskey tour kayo dito, huwag kayong mag-drive.
yung designated driver nyo dapat hindi
It's not a
wine
good
connoisseur.
feeling, man.
He hates it. He ended up spending extra $360 just so he can taste
Taste it at home.
at home.
Kaya ako napabili kasi gusto ko eh.
Kaya
Kakaigit eh.
if you're coming to the distilleries, don't drive. Get someone who doesn't
Don't
enjoy
drive.
drinking, man.
Drink, don't drive.
What about you, Rodrigo? Parang Ige, part of the R.E.R. What do you reckon of the LARK Distillery?
It's awesome. It's a really great experience. It's a really great experience. I enjoyed the whiskey tasting, obviously, and I also enjoyed taking the videos, recording content, and the most enjoyable part is hanging out with my boys
Yeah.
and my Bernie boy. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
These guys just had like
Inggit.
five whiskeys there.
Inggit.
That's why it's enjoyable, man.
Inggit.
It's not even.
Loser.
So sabi mga tagahanga, just wait for it.
Like and
We got
subscribe,
some surprise
bitch.
for you guys. Thank
I
you.
couldn't say that.
Yes, alright.
Like I said, big shout out. Big shout out
Drunk,
to.
that's why
Man, shut the fuck up.
You can't say that.
I just did. Pare. Well, big thank you to Thomas and Sophie, who was a great host, like I said before. Man.
Thank you.
LARK
Thanks.
Distillery. Hey, it's Ryan again from the R.E.R. Whiskey March, right? We just finished our LARK Distillery tour. And I would like to thank Sophie and Thomas for being such great hosts. I really enjoyed the tour. And like we said before, right? This is like our first time to try out Australian whiskey. All I can say is the market's there, although it's expensive. I think it's a must try. You guys gotta try it. It's really, really good. when you come to Tasmania, make sure you come to the Lark Distillery because it's a very good experience. But yeah, man, it's so far, man, Australian whiskey has been very, very good to us. Like the tasting notes, the experience is highly recommendable. So when you come to Tasmania, make sure you guys check out the distilleries. If you're a whiskey connoisseur, or if you enjoy whiskey, man, you gotta try Australian whiskey because it's one of the best so far, man. You can compare it to the 18 and 21-year-old Scotch whiskies, even the Japanese ones. I think we do have something to be proud of with the Australian whiskey market.